Greetings, Dr. Joseph Martin. We have an interesting topic today, and I'd like to give you a little bit of background before we jump into it now. My background for about 50 years now has been as a microbiologist, a virologist, immunologist, and also as a clinician working with homeopathic remedies, naturopathic remedies, and other indigenous, ancient, and modern herbal remedies. So, my background and training in degrees at the University of Toronto in the history and philosophy of medicine and also in microbiology, and my clinical work with miasms is the basis of what we're discussing. And I hope to inspire you to see that the evolution of the science in terms of what we know as germ theory, which is the presiding theory right now about a cause of illness and disease, and that means in terms of microbiological terms that there are bacteria, viruses, and there are ringworms and parasites and so on that cause illness. I'd like to suggest that this is a stage that we've moved beyond. There is an evolutionary knowledge in science now that will preclude the notion of germ theory, which now has passed us by. It does not acknowledge the more complex systemic reality of human nature and the world. And so, like all scientific theories, they come and go and they come and go. And the time is over now for germ theory. Having been a microbiologist, I can state that with clarity and precision. The notion of miasm is an interesting one. It's an ancient term which means stain or pollution. Now, as a medical anthropologist, we take it very clearly that there are cultural aspects to the notion of pollution. For instance, when we study India, as I have, not just in terms of the I am yoga that I'm suggesting will be the treatment for miasms when we get to that point, we note that, for instance, the Oxford professor Mary Douglas has written a lot of work on pollution and purity. Those are some of the titles of her books and articles. So that's referring to cultural pollution, where we have, unfortunately, still the caste system in India, where we have untouchables. And there's a notion that being around, or not just touching an untouchable, but being around one will cause a pollution in your mind and in your health and cause some illness. Well, I think maybe we can see that we can move beyond that as well. The notion of stain or pollution, though, has to do with some ancient roots in China from about 1,000 years ago when they were suffering from a lot of illnesses like typhus and other places, of course, in the Asian world like India. And they were trying to come up with some notion of what's causing it. So they felt like, as they did in the 1347 to 1351 Black Death plague of typhus in Europe, which decimated millions of people, and then again in Europe in the 1850s, typhus came back and caused a lot of death. The notion both in ancient China and still in modern China to some degree, although less, as they've moved past that, I think, unfortunately, in a lesser kind of knowledge of the system, and also in India, but then again in Europe with this typhus, the notion would be that there's something like a black vapor, a night vapor, some kind of a pollution in the air, and it is airborne, carried by air, and it's a noxious, poisonous vapor in the air that is caused by the decomposition of rotting matter or food, but actually just matter, even like dead bodies of people, dead bodies of animals and birds. And we'll get to the bird thing with H1N1 flu in a bit. And now, so the notion is that these illnesses were caused by, later we understood in the mid-1800s as microbiology and germ theory, bacteriological ideas came to the fore, and it's strictly on terms of we were able to see in a smaller into smaller matter with microscopes and more electron microscopes eventually in the 20th century, and we thought that these small bacteria, viruses, and so on um, caused illness. Well, yes, they do, but that's still a symptom. We haven't got to the root of it. We haven't got to the core cause of it. And that's what I'm presenting here in this video, which is simply an introduction of many more videos to come. What I have to offer to the world actually is a new scientific theory, which is more complex, more comprehensive, and more all-encompassing of the reality of cosmology, cosmobiology, astrobiology, and also just human nature, how we function and what causes illness, not just the symptoms. So we know from Rupert Sheldrake, who was a great scientist of our time, that there are morphic fields, or he calls them morphogenetic fields, and these are energy fields, and they are electromagnetic. There are memes, if you like that word as well. They are archetypal realities that are collective in their nature. They are something that are thought forms, if you like, to use that term as well. It's a good factual scientific term. So thought forms and emotions tied to thought forms actually create what I call morphopsychogenetic realities or energy fields. And what you know this, we can observe this as scientists, for instance, when we've done research on people feeling that they were being stared at. Now, they weren't looking at anybody, but they had a sense that if they turned around, somebody would be staring at them. And Sheldrake has done this research, as well as the telepathic connection between dogs and owners. The dogs know when the owner is coming home, even if it's at a different time than they usually come home. Now, with the enhancement of global consciousness of increasing EQ, or emotional intelligence, and what I call a different term of IQ, which I call intuitional intelligence, we know that more people on the planet globally are becoming telepathic, even psychic, if you will. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of morphopsychogenetic fields. In these fields, you know, for instance, when you're in a place, in a group of people, indoors or outdoors, where there's fear, panic, and anxiety, it's just like wildfire. It spreads to everybody in the soccer stadium or in the floor of a Toronto Stock Exchange or something like that, or the Nikkei index field, when people just go, well, there's a fall in terms of the economic market. You also know when you walk into a room where there's joy, like at a happy birthday party for somebody. And you also know when you walk into a hospital that there's an immense amount of despair, sadness, and grief. These are morphopsychogenetic fields that are tied to space and irrelevant with time, because they can exist and do exist throughout time, but they are particularly relevant to particular spaces or buildings, but they don't necessarily need to be, because more and more people can tune in just by listening to the news on their telly, the morphopsychogenetic field of fear and anxiety with the economic and the geopolitical status in this early 21st century. You know then, through all these examples, and there are thousands more I could give you, that this is a truth. We all resonate with this. We resonate with these morphopsychogenetic fields. And that when there's fear and anxiety involved, and increasingly there is on the planet, isn't there, every day and every year, then we realize that we're getting closer to what the cause of illness can be. Now let's flip over to Samuel Hahnemann, who is the founder of modern day homeopathic medicine, whether in India, Europe, or in the West or the East. And of course, he based a lot of his notion on the great advancements of Paracelsus, the great, probably one of the earliest and certainly the first great medical doctor in the West a few centuries back. Now, Hahnemann has identified, and all homeopaths on the planet today, including some naturopaths who have training in homeopathic medicine, understand that there have been 4 miasms. Now, I've told you what miasms are. Now, they're stains or pollutants, And I'd like to suggest it's not just the noxious air or the germs that come from decomposing food. And of course, we also understand that it can be in the water and waterborne as well as airborne. But we'd like to suggest that miasms are dark spots or stains or actually negative holes, if you like, in the collective psyche of all humanity. For instance, after the First World War, which was called the Great War to end all wars, and of course it wasn't, was it? We know that the First War was 1914 to 1918, and millions of people died. However, in 1918 to 1919, in 1 year alone, more people died in the Spanish flu influenza worldwide, not just in Europe, but also in the Orient and in Asia, than all the people who died in the war. And we estimate that there were anywhere between 21.5 to 40 million people who died within 1 year in the Spanish flu influenza of 1918 and 19. And this is actually way more people than died in the Black Death illness in Europe in 1347 to 1351, or the one that happened again in 1850. So we have a lot of evidence that, the grief and sadness from all the war and the death of loved ones who died in the war, whether they were military and soldiers or just innocent victims in the cultures and societies that were bombed, the grief and sadness, which was not dealt with, became rampant and this emotional imbalance and sadness and depletion and mental kind of grief and uh, depression and mental illness. And of course, we now call it post-traumatic stress disorder or syndrome, PTSD or PTSS. You can check it out. And I have another video on that, and I'll be doing more on that. We realized that that was the cause, this mental, emotional, morphopsychogenetic field was the cause of all this death. And Spanish flu was actually just the vehicle. The influenza was simply the vehicle. It was not the cause. We need to look at a deeper, higher cause for everything in the world. And in science, that's what we look for. We don't deal just with symptoms. Now, we also know that that was not the end of it, because after the Second World War, 1939 to 1945, there in fact was yet another influenza outbreak worldwide that killed millions of people. And so it happened after the end of the Korean War in the mid-1950s, yet another illness caused by grief, sorrow, mental illness, depletion, and trauma after the war. And again, it happened after the Vietnam War. After the Vietnam War, we started to realize as scientists and psychologists, particularly military psychologists, and I have dealt with many people who've come back from Iraq, Iran, wherever they were in Afghanistan, and different war places of the world, including Central and South America, and dealt with PTSD personally, and also with many of my friends today still. So we know that now there is a mental illness and emotional disturbance, which is quite severe, causing nightmares and all sorts of physiological, biochemical, unfortunate depletions and changes in the people after the war. But we also know that it's the war that caused it. It's the need to have people out there killing other people and destroying other people, which of course, whatever we do to others, we just do to ourselves. That's the golden rule in humanity and social systems. And so it kills us to know we've killed other people. So after the Gulf War in the 1990s, the first one, and then the second one again after that in the 2000s, we had the Gulf War syndrome. Now, this is a particularly deadly syndrome, both with American and Canadian soldiers and soldiers from all over the world. Some say that this is related to the vaccines. However, again, we're looking at causes, and the deeper causes are also spiritual poverty and impoverishment of the military who had to go through this experience individually, collectively, as well as the severe mental stress and challenge, not to mention all the emotions of sadness and guilt. I will imagine you would imagine as well that guilt is a big one around that. Having gone to this and killed people, particularly if they were trying to trust you to not hurt the innocent civilians or even the other soldiers. On and on we go, and of course we have this. This is a kind of an ongoing thing because we haven't understood the real cause of illness and what it's doing to humanity. And of course, we're needing to be awake and active and aware of what causes our illnesses and not just slough it off or keep it separated from all the science that we need to put together as a very complex, deep knowledge of how it's all interconnected as one open system. There are no closed systems. Everything works together, and we're looking at the deepest and the highest causes of what causes illness. Now, Hahnemann, back to Hahnemann, Samuel Hahnemann, the founder of homeopathic medicine, which is still with us today and still burgeoning. The four major miasms that he talked about are sora, psychosis. Now, this is not psychological terminology, it's psychosis without the P at the beginning, just sycosis. And also syphilis, which, as you know, is sexually transmitted, but it's much deeper than that. It's not about sexuality necessarily, it's about another deep internal cause in the human psyche, soul, and emotion, and body, and mind, conscious and unconscious mind. Of course, the unconscious mind plays a big role in the causality of illness, doesn't it? And one that after that is the tubercular miasm, which was identified and very much a part of the mid 1800s all through Europe and the rest of the world, where we had centers in Switzerland, Davos, and different places like that, where people could go if they were having tubercular problems and rest, and they had treatments there. Well, this is all also based on sadness and grief because tuberculosis is a lung respiratory illness, isn't it? And so we thought through modern medicine and pharmacology and so on that all this could be treated through drugs. Well, the truth is it cannot be and has not been, because tuberculosis has come back to us again, even in Canada, since the 1950s and again now in the 1990s and the first part of the 21st century among the First Nations people in particular, but now among non-First Nations in places in the territories and in Alberta. Now, back in the 1800s, when a lot of this germ warfare, and that's another topic, we won't go into biological warfare and chemical warfare, that is another topic. I guess I needed to say those words. But the germ theory of illness created some changes a little bit in the 1300s in Europe with the Black Death, but more so in the 1800s when there was a lot of illness and they were trying to understand what was causing it. So they thought if they had increased health sanitation, washing your hands, doctors washing their hands before they helped a woman to give birth, midwives washing their hands and scrubbing and cleansing the homes and the hospitals in the 1800s and so on, that this would change. And it was a worldwide global effort to create better health sanitation in terms of cleanliness to destroy the germs and bacteria. Well, we know that that's not the case because in Canadian hospitals and hospitals around the world, there are all sorts of cases where we have certain drug-resistant bacteria in particular, MRSA is one, and there's many others, where hospitals in Canada and America have to be shut down because the stringent health regulations and using of chlorine or bleach and other kinds of things to try to kill them, it doesn't work. And so this is a major concern, but it's also a scientific objective awareness that there are other things going on here when we have all these illnesses coming back. And the main one that was focused on by Hahnemann as a miasm is typhus. And in fact, typhus is coming back. Now, yes, we can say that in the third world where there's poverty and there's war camps and so on in Africa and other places in Asia, that it's because the poor drinking water and so on, and the food is contaminated, it's not refrigerated, and the meat is going bad and has ringworm and other bacteria in it. Yes, that's part of it. But I imagine you can also feel the spiritual and emotional impoverishment of the people going through these experiences and giving up hope and realizing that, in fact, what's causing this is something on a much deeper emotional, mental, and spiritual level. It's not just the poor drinking water or the food going bad, is it? So we have all this awareness now, whereas Hahnemann and modern day homeopaths from all over the countries of the world who do this work, and as I told you, I have done this myself for at least 40 years as a researcher, as a clinician, as an instructor and teacher in many of my own classes and so on, but also as trying to understand as a visionary scientist how this can all be put together in a more comprehensive and truthful way, because this is my goal is the advancement of science in the highest realms. And so what we have here now is I have added other miasms beyond the four that Hahnemann and the other homeopaths of the world have come up with. And I'm pleased to say that I'm not the only one who's come up with further miasms that are causing illness today globally among individuals and groups. The fifth one I came up with is the cancer miasm. And it's clear to say that statistically speaking, 1 in 2 people will or will likely get cancer in the world. In over the 40 years that I saw people, and many of my clients were coming down with cancer, so to speak, I was aware that 1 in 7, when I started to do my clinical research work, got cancer in Canada. And then when I finished, 1 in 2, despite billions, if not trillions of dollars of research into cancer and its causes and its treatments. My growing awareness over all those decades was that the true causes are spiritual impoverishment and disconnection from the source and the life and the light within, and also deep multi-generational and transcultural illnesses that are deeply emotional and unconscious. And when they're unconscious, they will have an effect, and they will psychosomatically manifest in the physiological, biological, biochemical body and make the changes, because there's a split between the conscious and the unconscious within the individual and within the civilization society. And as you will see in my other videos, we are definitely in an unconscious phase of civilization collectively, globally, now in the 21st century. And we have been for a long time. We are karmically moving through this all. This being the case, there are other ones that I can add. So we have about 10 now, and in future videos and future books that I will release to the world, there will be some understanding of the other kinds of miasms that have developed because we are unconscious of the causes of health and illness. And those are, the other 5 that we can add to this now, would be the acute anxiety one, which for no good reason people are having panic attacks and can't breathe. And these are spiritual, emotional, mental causes. The typhoid one, as I mentioned, is now a miasm, and it is coming back to all aspects of the world, not just the third world. Also, we have one that's based in ringworm and other spirochetes. And we have one that's based in malaria and parasites. And this is a global pandemic now. Scientists never knew how much disastrous health challenges parasites can be. And malaria is simply one of them. And leprosy also is another miasm. Now, we thought that we cured leprosy in the early part of the 20th century, but that's not the case. Leprosy is in fact coming back now. We have it in India and Pakistan and other parts of Asia. Now, I can attest to, on a personal level, the fact that both of my parents were in the Second World War. My father in the Canadian Armed Forces, and he was with the Queen's Own Rifles, and that's, of course, Princess Patricia these days, and my mother was a Dutch sufferer of the Hitler's Nazi regime when he took over Holland. I grew up as a young person, baby, person, and teenager, seeing the results of post traumatic stress syndrome, mental illness, psychosis, neuroses, and major health issues, including challenges with the liver, the kidneys, and of course the heart, which killed my father in the end. And all these can be attributed to the causes of war and the causes of putting yourself in a place, not just with the stress of war and the bombs and the rifles and the shooting and the strategies and so on. It's much more than that. Day in, day out, without any relief, when you experience this spiritual crisis and an ethical, moral crisis within yourself, as I speak with all soldiers, male and female, who have the same, it's an emotional, moral crisis when you're forced to be a soldier or the victim of war when your country is taken over. So what we have here is that we're looking at the deeper reasons and causes of all these illnesses, which seem to be becoming more and more rampant, notwithstanding science and all the trillions of dollars we put into it, and I'm sure somebody's making money out of it, but we have not found the answers. When we had the SARS epidemic worldwide, and then there was H1N1, and now it's H5N5, these illnesses are spiritual, mental, emotional, moral causes to these illnesses. There is no antidote that we can give in terms of pharmacology, and we need to find the real causes and therefore the real treatments. My knowing is that the real treatment is on a spiritual level, reconnecting with Source, and developing some sense of love and compassion and kindness for yourself and all other beings, not just other human beings, but in fact all our relations. Mitakuyo Yasin, we say in the First Nations way. And when you have that reconnection to Source, through particularly, I'm suggesting the I Am Yoga program, which is going to be online, and the I Am Self-Worth Self-Help Training Program, which will also be online soon, then you can start to deal with your post-traumatic stress. And we all have it, whether you've been at war or not, because the world is a war battleground. Not just militarily, the social fabric is gone. The cultural center does not hold. Our archetypes are changing. Our storyline of our global culture is gone. It's finished. It doesn't hold anymore. There is no story, no archetypal reigning story of goodness that is supporting people to feel good about and happy about their lives and productive. In this case, all you can do is work on yourself. There is nothing else to do. And the greater population numbers that work on ourselves, we will be the ones to co-create after we've gone through this denouement of where we're at socially and culturally. And health is going to be key here. You need to take your health seriously. And I don't just mean diet, exercise, food, sleep, water, and so on, or organic food. I mean something that's deeper. You need spiritual food. You need mental food that's going to heal your broken mind. And you need emotional food of love, friendship, and kindness from others and with yourself and with the Source that's going to make the difference and heal you. Now, in other videos, I will talk about all the different meditations and yoga I did with all my cancer clients and how, in fact, it did support them to regain their health. Not in all cases, because there's karma involved, and I'm sure there's other videos of mine and other people you can realize the true law of karma, which is cosmological, universal, and certainly pertains to humanity and this earth, planet Earth. So just in closing then, all this needs to be taken into account. You need to understand and look for and find for yourself and reflect upon and treat yourself with the positive treatments to all the true causes of illness. And I'm suggesting that we need to move well beyond germ and microbiological theory to understand the true nature of health and not health in our world and in our bodies. and in our astral body, our mental body, and our spiritual third body. So I wish you well. Stay tuned. There will be other videos on this topic. All my love and support to you, Dr. Joseph Martin. See you again soon.